Everybody, welcome back to another very exciting Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. I am your host, Jesús Ramirez. How's it going? Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's stream, we're going to do a dual lighting effect in Photoshop. What does that mean? Well, that's an effect where you get colored light from one side of your face to be a particular color and a different color on the other side. I'm sure you've seen this effect before. It's a really cool effect that I'm sure you can apply to almost any photo as long as it has the right lighting condition. And let me show you on my screen what that looks like. Let me just switch over into Photoshop here. And here you go. This is what the final effect will look like. Of course, this will be a non-destructive effect, and you're going to be able to change it or completely delete it just by dragging it over into the trash icon. As you know, I always like to work non-destructively. Also, I just want to say hi to the people in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. I see Sean in the chat. How's it going, Sean? It's been a while since I seen your name. Good to see you. We got Sam Peterson, General Kenobi, Matthew, Anki. Thank you so much for joining me today. Ted, thank you so much. Is saying I look fully recovered. I guess I am fully recovered. Some of you may know that I had a really bad medical experience. I had a stroke and almost died, but thankfully I'm 100% now. So don't worry about that. I appreciate that, Ted. Anyway, so what we're going to do today, oh, by the way, something I should mention before we start is that the files for this stream are going to be found in two places. You can go into behance.net/challenge/Photoshop, and you should be able to follow along. You can click on the take the challenge button, and you can come all the way down here to the July 25th button and click on the get started file so you can download the files and follow along with me. But unlike other streams, this particular stream, and whoops, you got to see my messy desktop there. This stream, unlike other streams, you can actually download the files directly from within Photoshop. You don't have to necessarily download from the Creative Challenge page. If you click on this icon, on the Discover Panel icon, you'll see the hands-on tutorial tab here. You can click on that, and then you can scroll down all the way down to where it says Add Photo Effects. And you'll see it here, add a colorful dual lighting effect to a portrait. This will be available in Photoshop 2022 and newer in the future. So when you click on this, what will happen is that you'll see my name, the title of the tutorial, a brief description, and you can click on Start Tutorial. And this will show you an on-screen, well, the image will open up. You can see now that I have the image open up in this tab, but you'll also get coach marks, overlays directly over Photoshop telling you what to do. So if after the stream you open up the file and you get stuck, you can always use this method and follow along that way if you like. Totally up to you. Either method works. Obviously during the stream, I'm going to be answering questions and maybe do a little more than the coach marks are showing, but you always have that as reference if you need it. So this is what we're going to start with. Also, let me know in the chat where you're streaming from. I'm streaming from beautiful San Francisco Bay Area in San Ramon, California. So let me know where you're all watching from. And it's great to see a lot of familiar faces. So thank you so much, everybody, for the support. I appreciate that. Awesome. So we don't have a lot of time. So let me just get right into the actual project. So as you can see, we're going to create this effect by taking advantage of adjustment layers. Adjustment layers allow you to apply a brightness or color adjustment to an image non-destructively, which means you can always come back and change it or delete it if you want to. We're going to start out by desaturating the image and then taking advantage of the gradient map overlay and blending modes to make it seem like we have light hitting our subject. So let's get right to it. So this is the image we're going to work with. And as you probably could tell, even if you've never seen me stream before, I really enjoy working in an organized manner. So I always like to create a group and just call it whatever that is. And you'll see why naming layers and groups is important. So I'll just call it dual lighting effect. And from here, we're going to start by desaturating the image. It's very important that if you're going to apply this effect, you get a photo that already has light hitting your subject. If you get a photo that looks very flat, like much like my face looks like right now, with no really strong highlights on either side, then the effect probably won't look as good. So if you want to create something like this, make sure that you use a photo with strong highlights on either side so that you can differentiate between the colors. Cool. So now that I have my group created, what you should do is create a black and white adjustment layer. The black and white adjustment simply will make an image black and white. And since this adjustment, this layer mask is not really controlling anything, I'm just going to delete it just so that I know it's not doing anything. And you don't have to if you don't want to, but that's one thing you can do. Also with the black and white adjustment layer, what you can do is adjust these sliders to control the intensity of the original color. So how dark will the original color look? So you can use the red slider to control the skin tones. If you want to create a more dramatic effect, you might want to drag this over to the right, to the left, excuse me, or drag it over to the right to create a less impactful effect. Totally up to you. In this case, I'll just leave it as default and that will work okay, but you have the ability to adjust those colors if need be. Side note, I always like, as you guys know, I always like to show random Photoshop tips and tricks. If you're using this adjustment layer, you can always switch the blending mode to luminosity and that brings the color back. And now you can use this adjustment layer to control the intensity of the original colors found in the image. In this case, we're not going to do that, but you have that option if you need it. So with the black and white adjustment layer, it will turn the image black and white, and that's what we want. And now it's time to create the actual color effect that we're going to apply to this image. To do so, we can create a gradient map. What a gradient map allows you to do is to map a color to the luminance values of the image. In this case, I have red going to white. This means that the darkest colors of my image will be red and the brightest colors of my image will be white. And I can, of course, change this to any other color that I want. I can now make my brightest colors green if I want to. I can make my darkest colors a different shade of red or green as well, or any other color that I choose. And you can create some really interesting effects, as you can see. In this case, I'm going to make this one black and the other one, whatever color I want that light to be. I can make it green, as you can see in this case, and it looks great. Or I can choose any other color that I want. I can go in for red or maybe an orange color, blue, whatever you want. I think I used red on the example earlier. I don't remember if I had red on the left or right side. I think it was on that side. Some of you with better memory would tell me what color I had it on that side. But as you can see, it doesn't matter because we're going to be able to change it. We're working non-destructible. So in this case, I guess we'll select red and I'll press OK and I'll press OK. Now, we need to make sure that we only affect one side of the image, not the other. So we want to make sure that we affect this side. But you know what? Before we do that, I just realized that I skipped a step. In this case, it doesn't matter because the background is black. But if we had something else in the background, then we would definitely want to isolate the effect just to the main subject. And to do so, all I'm going to do is select the background image, go into select and choose subject. Photoshop will use Adobe Sensei, which is artificial intelligence, to analyze the contents of the image and then create a selection around that. In this case, it does a fantastic job. And all I need to do is create a layer mask on the group. So that way, all the contents of the group will be confined to the contents of that layer mask. So it allows for more flexibility. You don't have to create so many layer masks. You just work with one. If you need to change that layer mask, then you just change it on the group and you don't have to change it on each individual adjustment layer, which obviously offers a lot more flexibility. Awesome. And I'm also looking at the chat to see if there's any good questions, as I go. So let me know if there's any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat and I can get in the, I can answer them for you. General Kenobi says, yes, my sensei, that's right. Adobe Sensei is awesome. But anyway, so now that we have the gradient map creating this red lighting effect, we want to make it seem or feel like it's actual light hitting his face. And for that, we can select the layer and choose one of the different blending modes. If you're familiar with blending modes, then you'll know that they're divided into groups. You can see these little lines here. You see these lines? These lines divide blending modes into groups. And the top group is just a normal blending mode, which means that if I select that, nothing's going to happen. Nothing will blend unless I bring down the opacity. Same thing is true for dissolve. This is a pattern dither effect. In other words, noise that you apply to the image by reducing the opacity. Then we have the darkening blending modes, which will make the image darker by keeping the darker pixels and making the brighter pixels disappear. Then we have the brightening blending modes, which do the opposite. We keep the brighter pixels and make the darker pixels disappear. Then we have the contrast blending modes, which sort of do both. If your pixels in your layer are dark, they create a darkening effect. If the pixels in your layer are bright, they create a brightening effect. We don't have to worry too much about the exclusion category. They basically look at the difference between pixels and create a result. Not really used that often. They're more for specific examples like aligning layers and things like that. And then we have the component group, which allows you to select specific components of color. For example, hue or saturation, or color, which is both hue and saturation, or luminosity. In this case, we're going to look at the contrast blending modes, and you'll notice that as I'm going down the list, some of these will look more like light. In this case, I'm going to go for probably vivid light, even though that doesn't look that good. If I bring down the intensity, it'll start looking more like light. And I'm just looking at this part of his face right here, because that's the color that I want to affect, or the side of his face I want to affect. So I can bring down the fill opacity just so that it looks more like light. Whatever I think, to my eye looks more like light, and that's where I will leave it. And I can also come in here and maybe change the color as well. I know I want it red, but maybe I can change the intensity to something that looks more like actual light. Totally up to you. Spend as much time as you want fine-tuning the effect. Then what I'm going to do is select this layer and press Control-I on Windows, Command-I on the Mac. And what I'm going to do now is just reveal the intensity, or the highlight rather, on that side of the face by painting with white on the layer mask, wherever I think this light will hit his body. So maybe somewhere along here, like so. Maybe there's some of that light coming here as well. Whatever you think will work. I see a question in the chat. General Kenobi is asking, gradient map only maps brightness, no matter the colors. That's right. So when you apply a gradient map, you're only going to apply the color based on the brightness value below. So whatever the darkest pixels are, no matter what color it is, will have black applied to it, and whatever the brightest pixel is, in this case, will have red applied to it. But what we did by changing the blending mode, we're actually changing that even further. So notice that we actually do have white on his face now because of the blending mode. And you may not like that, and that's fine. So in that case, you can choose something like linear light and maybe even bring down the opacity even further so it's not so red. Again, whatever you think the effect looks best to your eye. The point is that with the blending mode, we're trying to create more the illusion of actual light hitting the face. Again, you can look at a reference image if you like, or you can just try to imagine what that would look like. But yes, gradient map only affects the brightness, no matter the colors. Cool. So what we're gonna do now is work on the other side of this effect. Now the other side, there's a lot of ways you can adjust the other side of this image. You can, for example, click on the gradient map and just, oops, sorry, not gradient map. That was I actually created a solid gradient. So not to be confused, I actually made that mistake myself. The gradient is different than the gradient map. The gradient simply creates a gradient going from one color to another, which is why you get that effect of going from red to transparent, which is what I have here. You can see that the color is red, but we have 0% opacity on top. So it creates a red to transparent effect, which is what you see here. Not what I wanted, but maybe beneficial for other things. What I wanted to do is go into the gradient map. Oops, sorry about that. Into the gradient map here, and then select black on one side and blue on the other. And I'm actually doing it the long way so I can show you a faster way and you can hopefully appreciate it a little bit better. But you can adjust the color here, press OK, and press OK one more time. And then you can again do what I did earlier, which was change the blending mode, linear light or vivid light. Linear light works great. Either of those will work great in simulating a lighting effect affecting the face. And you can just bring down the opacity accordingly, whatever looks good to your eye, maybe something like that. And then I can invert this to completely hide it and paint with white. Again, I'm doing it the long way just so I can show you the fast way in a moment. So now I'm basically painting on the other side, like so, to create the color on that side of the face. So that's one way in which you can do it. The way that I would do it, just to save some time, and you'll see how much time it saves, that's why I did it the long way so you could see the differences, is that you can take this gradient map here and you can just duplicate it by pressing Control J on Windows. That's Command J on the Mac. And you can duplicate that layer, which will again create the same effect. But the advantage now is that we have the layer mask we created earlier. Remember, we created this layer mask. By the way, when you click on a layer mask, you can hold the Alt key on Windows, that's the Option key in the Mac, to reveal the layer mask, and you can see what it looks like. So this is the mask we painted earlier to affect the face and the side of his body. So it's exactly the same, right? But now we just want the opposite. We want to make sure that we affect the side that we did not paint on, and the side that we painted on, we don't want to affect that. So to do so, we can just select this layer and press Control I on Windows, Command I on the Mac. Notice that the layer mask now is inverted. So these white pixels are revealing the effect and the black pixels are hiding the effect. We painted with white here, so those white pixels now turn black, which means that we're now hiding the effect in that area. And we don't have to worry about the edges of the mask or the subject because we created this mask earlier. So that's the advantage, that we can just drop a bunch of layer mask or adjustment layers in there and not worry about the edges of the subject because it's being controlled by the group. So now that we have this effect, the reason that that looks like that is because we have the layer mask active. Let me disable it. I just had it active, so I needed to disable it. That's why you saw red on there. Please name the layer. Oh yeah, I should definitely name the layers. But yeah, so good point. You know, I talked about the important reasons of naming the layers earlier. So let me show you why that's important. So in this case, I think this was a blue effect layer, or the red, I'm sorry, red effect layer. And then this one will be the blue, but it's currently red. So the reason that you want to name your layers in groups is because if you have the move tool selected, you can right click over your layer and you can see Photoshop will look at the pixels below where you right clicked on and give you the names of the groups. You can see the dual lighting effect group. So I can click on that and select the group, or the individual layers. So for example, I can click on this one that reads red and it will select red, or the background layer, it selects the background layer. So I know what layer I'm selecting just by right clicking wherever I right click. See here, I only have the background layer. So that's the only thing I can select. Here, I have the blue and black and white. So I'll select blue and it selects the blue layer, even though it's red now. We haven't changed the color. The point is that naming your layers makes it so that when you're selecting layers, it becomes more efficient because you can just right click and select what it is. Now, can you imagine if you had a bunch of layers like this and then you right click, oops, I guess there's no content in them. Let me actually put some content in them so that you can see what I mean. So I'm just going to paint with red there and I'm just going to duplicate that layer a bunch of times. And if I were to right click and all your layers are named layer 1 or copy 4 or whatever, you really don't know what things are. So that's why you should always name your layers. It just helps you work a little bit faster and it's more efficient. So it's a habit that I got into and I highly recommend that you do. Bruce is asking a question in the chat. Very good question, Bruce. The question is, Jesus, if you make an action outside of the group folder, it will affect anything outside the original mask? Yes. So I'm assuming what you mean by that, Bruce, is that if I create a layer or do anything outside of the group and I paint, it will affect everything outside of it. See how it's just affecting everything outside of the group? But if I click and drag and go inside, it only affects the contents of the group. I think that's what you meant by your question, Bruce. If not, let me know. Let me know if it was a different question. Also, since you use the word action, you could also create an action. You can also go into the actions folder, hit record, basically do everything I just did, and now you have an action for all images, and just hit play and it'll run through all the steps, because we're not really doing anything that's specific to this image besides the layer mask. But you can set besides this layer mask, this one here, because everything else was created using the select subject button, which will give you a different result for every image. So you can run an action that covers everything we've done. And then the last step for you is to manually select where the light goes. So you could also do that. But anyway, so now how do we make this blue? Very easy. We can click on this icon here and we have black on the left and blue on the right. So I can just now change this. I'm sorry, we have red on the right and we want to make it blue. So now we can just change it to blue like that and press OK. So that was much faster than what I did earlier. I don't know if you remembered. I went through creating the layer, selecting the colors, selecting the blending mode, and adjusting the fill. In this case, I only just duplicated the layer, double clicked on the properties here to enable the gradient editor and just change the color. But the point is that once you have it set up like this, you can adjust it any way that you want, right? So maybe you don't want this to be blue. Maybe you change your mind and you're like, you know what? Maybe I want this side to be red. You can definitely do that. And then come in here and make this side blue. And now there it is. You have that effect. And since everything is non-destructive, you can always come back and bring down the intensity. So you keep everything editable. If you think linear light is too strong and you might be happier with like vivid light or something like that, you can definitely do that as well. Whatever looks good to your eye. And also something I should mention before we end the stream is, I know that blending modes could be confusing, but if you search for blending modes on Google, one of the first pages you'll see is on my website here. It's called Blending Modes, Explain the Complete Guide of Blending Modes. And let me make sure it loads before I bring it up on screen, which is this here. I wrote this really long article a couple years ago, and I even made a video on it explaining how all blending modes work. So if blending modes confuse you, just go into photoshoptrainingchannel.com/blending modes explain, and I can paste the link in the chat for you guys. And basically, I just cover all the blending modes in this article. So if you have any questions about how a specific blending mode works, you can definitely come into this guide and check it out. Also, one of the reasons I was using opacity or fill rather than opacity with blending modes is that there are 8 blending modes that react differently when you change fill compared to opacity. These are the 8 blending modes here, including vivid light and linear light. And in my opinion, when you adjust fill compared to opacity on these blending modes, you get a better result. So notice how fill works with vivid light compared to opacity. See that? See how it just looks flat and it doesn't feel like it's blending with the layer below when I adjust opacity compared to fill. See that? See the difference? So I think that with those 8 blending modes, you'll get a much better result if you bring down the fill compared to the opacity. Let me see if there's any other questions in the chat. Okay, awesome, Bruce. I'm glad I answered your questions. Cool. Thank you so much, Enlightened Swami. I appreciate that. Awesome. Yeah, it looks like we don't have any other questions in the chat. We have a couple more minutes to go. Awesome, Matthew. I appreciate that. Yeah. So just remember to go into the Discover panel and make sure that you click on hands-on tutorials. I'll show the process again, hands-on tutorials, so that you can go into this section here called add photo effects, and you can follow along from within Photoshop using the overlay coach marks. It'll basically create what we just created. These are tutorials found within Photoshop. And then if you create anything using these techniques, make sure that you go into Behance and share it in the Photoshop section on Behance. And you can get that to it by going into behance.net/challenge/Photoshop, and you can click on the community tab. Also, if you don't want to download the files from within Photoshop, or you're following along with an older version of Photoshop, you can always check out the dual lighting effects section here on July 25th, 2022. Awesome. And thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate you being here with me today. I will be doing more live sessions here for the rest of the week. As you can see, these are all the projects that we're going to work with this week. So I look forward to being with you guys here for the rest of the week. Again, it's great to see everybody, a lot of friendly and familiar faces. Thank you so much, General Kenobi, Sam Peterson, Sean, thank you all so much. Steve, I really appreciate you being here with me today. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned a lot of new tips and techniques. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will talk to you again very, very soon. Bye, everybody.